Hi everybody, my name is Manuela from the company EduTECH, and we're here actually today with our product CoSpaces. And my colleague Suzanne over here and I were going to talk about creating virtual reality in the classroom. So it's pretty obvious why VR in the classroom is interesting. I mean, it takes you out of the classroom without you having to leave it, and there are a lot more opportunities for students and teachers. It really helps their learning, plus it makes the learning matter a lot more exciting, more graspable, more real, and basically you learn by experience and not only by reading something off a piece of paper. But not only experiencing VR is interesting, and we believe that the real value in the classroom comes from creating your own virtual reality. And this is what we would like to talk about today. So a little bit about us first. We are EduTECH, a startup from Munich, Germany, and we've created a platform that allows anyone to really easily create their own VR experiences. So you create on the desktop, and then this is connected to your smartphone with an app, and you put the smartphone into a regular VR headset, and then basically that way you can experience your own VR. We have kids and teachers using CoSpaces all over the world, creating their own VR experiences, and we see lots of benefits in them doing that. So first of all, creating something from scratch alone has many benefits. So you practice being creative, and there's this special sense of achievement when you create something on your own, and especially when you experience all that in VR and you become a part of what you've created yourself. This really enhances this sense of achievement. And in general, VR is a great medium to express yourself creatively because it lets you experience your creations in a very special way. Kids are very fascinated by VR. Not only experiencing, but really working and creating with it allows them to understand this medium and to actively engage with it. After all, VR is becoming more and more a part of their reality today. And lastly, don't forget the fun factor. So VR is cool, and anything that's cool will be remembered better. Okay, so there are a lot of things that you can do with VR creation in the classroom, and I would like to give a couple of examples of how some of the teachers we know use CoSpaces in the classroom these days. And some obvious choices are creating models to show complex subjects, or creating VR exhibitions instead of like regular old presentations like this one. Or creating actual stories, or random fantasy spaces like this very cool chocolate world. And actually your imagination is the limit, so you can do whatever you want with it. Here's an example of how a school in Oregon used CoSpaces for vocabulary training. So the kids got a list of new vocabulary in Spanish, and they created, in groups, they created virtual flashcards. Okay, so what they got in the end were these virtual worlds around the vocabulary they used, that they could go back to any time they wanted. And on a side note, apparently the engagement level was very high during this project, and the teachers said that they had never seen this much enthusiasm towards vocabulary. Another great example is storytelling, and actually this was a workshop done by the startup Immersively from Singapore, over there. And so, by the way, if you want to find out more about this workshop also, you can go to Lionel sitting over there. And what they did was they had parents and kids come to this workshop, and they gave them an intro to virtual reality and taught them the basics of virtual reality. And then the kids wrote their own stories on pen and paper, and after that they created their virtual worlds around these stories. And then their story was recorded either on their own or their parents recorded it. And in the end, they put the virtual world and the story together, and then they were able to dive into the stories that they created, and they experienced their story in VR. And one last example, so this was a teacher from Ohio, and this was literature class. So the class read the book The Giver, and then each student chose a scene from the book and described it in an essay. And then they created a setting for the scene that they chose with co-spaces. And they actually chose 3 important objects and put them in the scene and explained or explained their interpretation of the importance of these objects to the class. And we actually have an interview of what the students thought of this. And I hope this works.
Like this project because we got to like you made your own houses and stuff. I can understand it better on this project
because it helps us visualize what the Giver book is about.
Because it was really fun to create our own images of what we think it would look like in the book, because the book has no pictures, so how do we know what stuff actually looks like?
It helped me understand the scene of the book better than the book actually.
Okay, I don't know if this was, if you were able to understand this. So some of the feedback basically was that it made the book come to life for them, it helped them to understand the book better, and the teacher actually said that some children really have trouble imagining things in their mind. So having to visualize it really just helped them kind of form a mental model and an inner picture of this. And now Susanne is going to explain to us a little bit more in detail how CoSpaces works and how you can create something with that.
Okay, we have already seen that there are lots of possibilities of what you can do with VR creation in the classroom, and now I want to show you using one concrete example how you would create something. So what we're going to look at is how could you create your own virtual reality story. This is similar to the example that Manuela already talked about with the workshop that Immersively did, but you could build something else in a very similar way. So I think if you see this example, you could also imagine how you could build other things like models, for example, in virtual reality. Storytelling, for example, can be interesting for foreign language class, for literature class, to combine language or to combine literature and technology in a very engaging way. So what you will finally get at the end of this process that I'm going to show you is a virtual reality experience where you can listen to a story and at the same time you can explore the settings of the story. So it feels a bit like stepping into a picture book while someone reads the picture book to you. So first, what are you going to need for that? What will you need for that? So you need a laptop or a computer where you will create the experience. And in order to look at it in virtual reality, you need a cardboard headset and a smartphone that will run your VR experience. So with the example that we are showing, we create the scene on CoSpaces and then look on the browser app and then look at it in the smartphone app. Okay, since we're talking about virtual reality stories, of course the first thing that you need is a story. So you can either choose one or you can write one, which is especially interesting when you want to do it in language class, and then you can combine it with creative writing. There are 3 things that you should pay attention to when choosing or writing your story. It should be rather short, because otherwise you might have to create a lot of scenes. It should also be rather simple, because if it has many plot twists or many change of settings, especially for your first virtual reality story, it might be a bit tedious to create it. And the last thing is that your story gets more interesting if the settings are interesting, because that is really the exciting thing about a virtual reality story, that you can explore the setting of a story while hearing it. And so if you choose something that has interesting settings, it will be more fun. Once we have our story, we can start creating the scene. So the next step that I'm going to show you are done in the CoSpaces browser app, where you would create the scenes for your virtual reality story. A scene would basically be, I think you would start a new scene whenever there's a major change in the setting or a major change in the plot. But you can also create a virtual reality story that has only one scene, of course. What do I mean when I talk about scenes? So here, as an example, you see a virtual reality story that has 4 scenes. This is still the first one, and you see the scene is a static, 3-dimensional environment that you can move through freely. And while moving through it, you would hear the story at the same time. So this is a 4-scene story about a little boy who finds a rocket in his front garden, and then he travels with the rocket to a foreign planet, and in the end he comes home and dinner is ready. Okay, so the first thing you would do when starting your scene is choosing the setting. So this is pretty easy. You just decide what should the background, what should the environment of my first scene look like. And after you've done that, you can really start building the scene by putting objects, and with these objects creating a whole environment. Putting the object just works via drag and drop, and then you can adapt them. I think you can imagine it a bit like building something from virtual Playmobil. You can just place the bits and pieces on a stage, but different than with Playmobil, you can also adapt the size, you can adapt the color, you can put things together to form new objects. There are a few things that you might want to pay attention to when building something for virtual reality. The first thing is that you should actually check it in virtual reality while building it or before the end. Because virtual reality works different than most media that we're used to. Because usually when we create something, we create it for an outside spectator. But with virtual reality, the person who will be your spectator, your viewer, is actually inside the creation. So it makes sense to check that before you finalize your project, to see if it might not look strange in some way. Sometimes you might make things so big that in virtual reality you go like, and you can't see the whole thing, for example. Another thing is that you might not find any object that you need in the library, or you might even build some fantasy story with something that you just made up. For this, you can always create your own objects, and this is actually also where the fun and the creativity really starts. So, for example, this is a story for which I needed a mill. It was a fairy tale, and so you see here the basic building blocks, and I could just put it together. Or another example with the story with the rocket that we saw before, where I created an alien planet, and I basically just took random objects, made them in weird colors, and put them together, and you have your alien planet. So now we're done with the first scene. That means we can start building the other scenes if we want to have more than one scene in our virtual reality story. And we're from Germany, we like recycling, so my tip here would be recycle. Probably there will be things that will be similar in several of your scenes. You might come back to the same setting, or some of the characters might appear in different scenes. So you can just copy the whole scene and then change something about it. In the example that you see here, I took the first scene to create the last scene, and then I basically just changed the time of the day, and I tidied up the garden a bit, and then it was evening. Now we're actually nearly done with our story. What we're missing now is the sound. For that, you can just use any voice recording app on your smartphone, for example, and with that you record yourself reading the story. What is even more fun is if you get other people in and you can read the story together, for example with assigned parts. And then you just take that file and you put it into your project in the browser app, and then you have your finished VR story. And now you probably want to see it. In order to do that, you need the smartphone app, And on the smartphone app, you can just access the story that you built, put it into your headset, and then you're ready to go and enjoy your story. So, if you have any question or ideas about VR creation in the classroom, you can always come to us later and ask questions. And we also have a booth back there in the startup section, and we would love to see you there. Thank you.